Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're taking a trip into the world of the Federal Reserve.
Always an interesting topic.
It is, right? I mean, it's kind of shrouded in mystery, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely shrouded in mystery, yeah. A
Mm.
lot of intrigue, a lot of history, a lot of strong opinions, too.
Strong opinions for sure. Well, we're going to try to unpack at least some of that mystery for you today.
Okay.
We'll be using Anthony Sutton's 1995 book, The Federal Reserve Conspiracy, as our roadmap for this deep dive.
An interesting choice. It definitely presents a unique perspective
Yeah.
and raises some thought-provoking questions.
It does. So get ready to dive deep into the fascinating world of money and power.
Sounds good.
Okay, so Sutton kicks things off by taking us all the way back to the very beginning,
Yeah.
early days of the United States.
Right back to the Founding Fathers.
Exactly. And guess what? Already, even back then, there was this huge debate raging over whether or not to have a central bank.
Oh, absolutely. It was a fundamental point of contention
Yeah.
right from the start.
Huge disagreement between big names like Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton.
Two titans with very different visions for the new nation.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? How these early disagreements, they still kind of resonate with us today.
Totally. I mean, think about the discussions we have now about the Fed. They often echo these same themes.
They really do. So Jefferson, right. He was known for his what was it? His commitment to individual liberty, wasn't it?
Yes, a fierce advocate for individual freedom.
He was deeply, deeply suspicious of like concentrated power, especially when it came to finance.
He saw it as a potential tool for manipulation and control, and he was especially worried about the power to control the nation's currency.
Right. Like who has the authority to issue money? Is it the government or is it private institutions? That was a big question.
A crucial question. And Jefferson had a pretty stark warning about what could happen if banks were given that power.
Yeah, and I've got the quote right here.
Oh, let's hear it.
Okay, so Jefferson said, quote, "If the American people ever allow the banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children will wake up homeless on the continent their fathers occupied."
Wow, that's powerful. A bit dire, but it definitely makes you think.
It does. Homeless on the continent their fathers occupied.
Yeah.
Like that image stuck with me.
It's a striking image. It really captures Jefferson's deep distrust of centralized financial power.
Right. So while Jefferson was very much against the central bank, we have Hamilton, who was the first Secretary of the Treasury, and he actually saw it as
Yeah.
essential, like a key ingredient for the new nation to grow and be stable, economically speaking.
Exactly. Hamilton believed a central bank was necessary to manage the nation's finances, to promote trade and industry.
Yeah, so you have these two like completely different viewpoints.
Two very different visions for the role of government and finance.
This clash really set the stage for the ongoing debate about central banking in the U.S., wouldn't you say?
Totally. I mean, we're still grappling with these same fundamental questions today.
We are. So, okay, these early disagreements, right? They actually played out in a very real way. Like we saw the establishment and then the dismantling of the first two central banks in the U.S.
Yeah, the first few decades of the nation's history were quite turbulent in terms of banking and finance.
They were. So the first central bank, right? The Bank of the United States,
Yeah.
established in 1791,
Yeah.
championed by Hamilton,
Despite significant opposition, yes.
like James Madison. Even he opposed it.
Yes. Madison was concerned about the bank's potential to become too powerful, too influential.
And it didn't last very long, right?
No, its charter wasn't renewed by Congress. Concerns about constitutionality and its power ultimately led to its demise.
Only 20 years it lasted.
Yeah.
So then, fast forward a bit, right? After the War of 1812, there was all this financial instability, all this chaos.
The war had drained the nation's resources. There was no national currency, and different states were issuing their own banknotes. It was a mess.
Yeah, a real mess. And that's when the Second Bank of the United States emerged.
In 1816, yes, modeled after the first bank, but with even greater capitalization.
More money involved. But this time it faced a really powerful adversary, President Andrew Jackson.
Oh, yeah. Jackson was not a fan of the bank, not one bit.
He was not. So Jackson, positioned himself as like a champion of the common man.
Man of the people. He was very popular.
He was. And he saw the second bank as this like money monster, I think is how he describes
A
it.
monster, yes, designed to benefit the wealthy elite at the expense of everyday citizens.
At the expense of the average person.
Exactly.
He was not having it.
He wasn't, and he fought tooth and nail against it.
He vetoed the renewal of its charter in 1832. And that was basically the end of the second bank.
It was a decisive victory for Jackson and a major setback for the proponents of central banking.
It's wild, though, right? How many Jackson arguments from, like, back then are still relevant today?
Oh, yeah. It's uncanny.
Like, concerns about the influence of financial institutions on the government, the potential for corruption.
Absolutely. And that idea that a central bank could favor the interests of a select few, over the needs of the many.
Yeah. Like, is it serving the people, or is it serving the elite?
It's a question that has haunted the debate over central banking from the very beginning.
It has. So you're basically saying that this whole, like, battle for control over currency, this tension between, like, centralized financial power and the well-being of the average person, it's been this recurring theme throughout U.S. history.
Oh, absolutely. A constant push and pull. It's woven into the very fabric of our financial system.
That's fascinating, isn't it? And it's important to keep that in mind as we move forward in our deep dive.
Absolutely. It provides context. It helps us understand the forces at play.
Okay, so we've got, the Founding Fathers arguing about central banks. We've got Andrew Jackson battling the money monster. But then Sutton throws in this figure that I really wouldn't have expected in a discussion about the Federal Reserve, Clinton Roosevelt.
Now, that's an interesting character.
He is. I mean, I know about, Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but Clinton Roosevelt.
Not as well known, but certainly a fascinating figure in his own right.
Yeah, and his ideas were pretty radical for the time, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely ahead of his time.
So he publishes this Socialist Manifesto back in 1841, way before Marx and Engels.
Right. Well before those ideas entered the mainstream.
And his work, The Science of Government, founded on natural law, it lays out this vision of a highly centralized, planned economy, like controlled by a grand marshal and this council of experts.
He envisioned a society where the government had significant control over production and consumption.
Yeah, and it would eliminate, like, individual economic choice, right? It'd just be this small group in charge of everything. Like, did any of his ideas actually gain traction back then?
Well, in the 1840s, they were considered fringe, but what's interesting is how Sutton connects this early blueprint, right, to the later emergence of things like the War Industries Board during World War I.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that was a big government intervention in the economy, right?
Huge. And then the National Recovery Administration during the Great Depression.
So these organizations involved, like, a lot of government intervention, right? Which some people would say, like, echoes Roosevelt's vision, this centrally planned system.
It's a provocative connection that Sutton makes.
It makes you wonder, right? It does.
Like, are there parallels to government programs and interventions that we've experienced, in our own lifetimes? Have we, in some ways, moved towards that model that Clinton Roosevelt envisioned, even if, like, unintentionally?
That's the question Sutton wants us to grapple with. It is a thought-provoking question. Like, it makes you wonder about the long-term impact of ideas, how they can, like, evolve and resurface in these unexpected ways.
Ideas have a life of their own. They can morph. They can reemerge in new contexts. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating and kind of scary too, right?
A bit, yeah. It reminds us that we need to be aware of the intellectual currents that shape our world.
Definitely. Okay, so we can't really talk about central banking, right, without talking about, well, I guess the elephant or maybe the bearded philosopher in the room, Karl Marx.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The granddaddy of communist theory.
So known for his critique of capitalism, his call for a communist revolution, but how does he fit into the story of the Federal Reserve?
That's where Sutton gets really interesting. He argues that Marx's ideas, particularly those outlined in the Communist Manifesto, have a surprising connection to the Fed.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Specifically, he points to point number 5 of Marx's 10-point program for establishing a communist state.
A 10-point program. That's pretty specific. Okay, what does point number 5 say?
It calls for the centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly.
Wait a minute. A central bank with a monopoly on credit. Doesn't that sound a lot like the Federal Reserve?
The resemblances is striking, isn't it?
It is. And Sutton uses this to argue that the Fed, while it's, presented as a tool for economic stability, it actually aligns with a key tenet of Marxist ideology.
It's a bold claim for sure.
It is, but it does make you think, like, how much do the Fed's actions actually align with the principles of a free market economy?
A good question, one that we should always be asking.
Right. And are there unintended consequences of having this incredibly powerful central bank?
Those are the questions that Sutton wants us to consider.
Okay, so that's a bold claim. But then Sutton throws another curveball our way. He presents evidence that suggests that Marx might have plagiarized his manifesto
Now that's an interesting twist.
from an earlier French socialist, Victor Considerant.
Considerant's work, Principe de Socialisme, actually predates the Communist Manifesto.
Hold on. So you're telling me that the ideas that shook the world, they might not have been so original after all?
It's certainly a possibility that Sutton raises, and it adds another layer of complexity to our understanding of Marx and his influence.
It does. And it also makes you question, like, the origins of socialist thought itself. Where did these ideas really come from?
It's a fascinating question.
It is, but it gets even more intriguing.
Oh, there's more.
There's more. You ready for this?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Okay, so Sutton then claims that there's this connection between American banking interests and the financing of Marx's work.
Now, this is where things get really interesting.
Right. He introduces this character, Jean Lafgate, who in the early 1800s, he was known as a pirate.
A pirate turned banker. That's quite a career change.
It is. But according to Sutton, Lafayette went underground, and he became this courier for American banking interests.
So he was moving money around for powerful financial figures.
He was. But here's the crazy part. According to Sutton, Lafayette's personal journal.
Ah, the primary source.
It contains entries that detail his mission to Europe in the 1840s.
Yeah.
Where he actually met with both Marx and Engels.
Face to face with the fathers of communism. That's a bombshell.
Right. And get this, Lafayette claims that he, quote, opened an account in a bank in Paris, a credit in escrow, to finance two young men, Mr. Marx and Mr. Engels, to help bring about the revolution of working men of the world.
Whoa. So he's saying that he was funneling money to Marx and Engels to fuel their revolutionary activities.
He is.
That's a pretty explosive claim.
It is. So are we saying that American bankers might actually funded the Communist Manifesto? That seems like almost too crazy to believe.
It's a bold claim. And it's important to remember that Lafayette's journal is the primary source for this information.
Right. And its authenticity hasn't been, definitively proven.
Exactly. It's one piece of the puzzle. And it requires further investigation.
It does. So we have to take it with a grain of salt.
A healthy dose of skepticism is always warranted when dealing with historical sources.
Always. But even if it's partially true, it would completely change our understanding of how these revolutionary ideas came to be.
It would suggest that the story is much more complex than we might initially think. And it raises questions about the motives of these powerful financial figures. What were they hoping to achieve?
Right. What were their goals? It's all very mysterious.
History is full of mysteries, and that's part of what makes it so fascinating to explore.
It is. Okay, so let's move on to a more familiar figure, Abraham Lincoln.
Honest Abe. A truly iconic figure.
He is.
Yeah.
And I always thought that he was known for fighting against slavery, not battling banks.
He was. But Sutton argues that Lincoln's fight against slavery was actually closely tied to his opposition to what he called the money power.
The money power.
Yeah, the influence of private banking interests.
So he saw them as a threat.
He did. He believed that they wielded too much power and that their interests often clashed with the interests of the nation.
Interesting. So during the Civil War, right, Lincoln, he needed money to finance the Union's efforts.
Of course. Wars are expensive.
They are. But he faced resistance from these private banks.
The banks wanted to control the issuance of currency. They saw it as a lucrative opportunity.
So it was another battle over who controls the money.
Yeah.
The government or private institutions.
The age-old struggle.
Yeah.
Who has the power to create and control the nation's currency? It's a question that has been at the heart of many political and economic conflicts.
It has.
Yeah.
So did Lincoln succeed in this fight?
Well, it was a mixed bag. He did establish a national currency through the Legal Tender Act of 1862.
So that was a victory for Lincoln, right?
A significant one.
Yeah.
It was a major step towards centralizing control over the nation's money supply. But the banking interests, they also scored a major victory with the passage of the National Bank Act of 1863.
And what did that act do?
Imagine this. The government needs money to fight a war, so they borrow it from private banks. But now, those banks get to issue their own currency backed by that government debt.
Wait, so they get to, like, print their own money?
Essentially, yes. It created a system where the government was in debt to private banks, and that system, in a modified form, persists today.
Wow, that's crazy. So even though Lincoln tried to assert government control, private banks ended up with even more influence.
That's one way to look at it. And to illustrate this further, Sutton points to a letter from Senator John Sherman to the Rothschild banking family in London.
The Rothschilds, those are some big names in banking.
A powerful international banking dynasty. And this letter was written in 1863. In it, Sherman details the lucrative opportunities that were created by the National Bank Act. And he essentially encourages the Rothschilds to invest in the system.
So you're saying we have a senator, a U.S. senator, who's pushing legislation that seems to benefit his banking buddies.
That's the picture Sutton paints. And it certainly raises questions about the motivations behind these policies.
It does. Like, was it about serving the nation's needs, or was it about personal gain?
A question that has plagued politics since, well, probably forever.
Probably. It makes you wonder if this was such a great idea, right? Why did they have to resort to these kinds of tactics to get it passed?
It's a valid question, and it speaks to the concerns about transparency and accountability that surround the Federal Reserve, even to this day.
Right. Like, what are they hiding? What are they not telling us?
It's a question that we should always be asking.
Okay, this is getting good. This whole story is just full of, like, power struggles and behind the scenes dealings. I'm really curious to see what happens next. Where does this story take us?
Well, our next stop is the early 20th century, to a secret meeting that would lay the foundation for the Federal Reserve as we know it today, the infamous Jekyll Island conspiracy.
Ooh, a conspiracy. Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, hold on to your hats, deep divers, because things are about to get really interesting.
Okay, so set the scene for me. What exactly was the Jekyll Island conspiracy?
All right, so picture this. 1910,
Okay.
A group of really wealthy and influential financiers,
Okay.
like Senator Nelson Aldrich, who had very close ties to the Rockefellers,
Okay.
and Frank Vanderlip, president of National City Bank.
Okay.
They all embark on this super secret mission
That's secret.
to a private island
Ooh,
off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island.
Jekyll Island.
They used assumed names to avoid detection, the whole 9 yards.
Wow, it sounds like something out of a spy novel or something. So what was the purpose of this clandestine gathering? Why all this secrecy?
They were there to draft a plan for a central banking system in the United States.
Okay.
But there was a problem.
What's that?
There was significant public resistance to the idea at the time.
So they knew they couldn't exactly, like, hold a town hall on this?
Nope, not a chance.
Okay, but why all the cloak and dagger stuff? Why not just, present their ideas to Congress like any other policy proposal?
Well, Vanderlip himself admitted that if it became known that this group had gotten together and written a banking bill, it would have absolutely no chance of passing Congress.
Really?
Public perception was a huge obstacle.
Wow, it makes you wonder, what were they so afraid of? Why were they so convinced that the public wouldn't support their plan?
That's a good question. Perhaps they understood that concentrating this much financial power in the hands of a select few would raise concerns about, accountability, transparency.
Yeah, you're putting a lot of trust in a very small group of people.
Exactly. But their plan did eventually make it to Congress, thanks in part to Woodrow Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson. Now, didn't he campaign on, like, being a critic of trusts and monopolies?
He did.
But then he ends up signing the Federal Reserve Act into law in 1913.
That's right.
I mean, what happened there? What changed?
Well, Sutton argues that Wilson's, shall we say, transformation from critic to supporter of the central banking system was no accident.
Okay, so what are you saying?
He suggests that Wilson was, for lack of a better term, groomed for the presidency by powerful figures with ties to, you guessed it, Wall Street.
So are you saying that these financiers, they saw Wilson as someone they could influence, someone who could help them, achieve their goal of establishing a central bank?
That's the argument Sutton puts forth. He points to figures like Cleveland Dodge, a national city bank director, and Wilson's Princeton classmate, who played a key role in financing and promoting Wilson's campaign.
Wow, talk about like money in politics, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Makes you think, was Wilson truly acting in the best interest of the nation, or was he kind of beholden to the people who helped him get elected?
It's a question that's been debated by historians for decades.
It has.
But one thing is for sure. The passage of the Federal Reserve Act in December 1913 was a major turning point in American financial history.
It was.
And Sutton argues that the legislative process itself was riddled with irregularities.
What do you mean by irregularities?
Well, he points to things like rushed debates, information being withheld from certain members of Congress, and even the exclusion of dissenting voices, particularly Republicans, from crucial discussions.
So they were trying to push this bill through as quickly and quietly as possible.
Trying to avoid any real scrutiny or debate.
Wow, that sounds pretty shady.
Doesn't it? And to make matters worse, he highlights the significant conflict of interest involving key figures like Senator Robert Latham Owen and Congressman Carter Glass.
And what was their conflict of interest?
Both of them were bankers. Bankers who stood to benefit directly from the passage of the act.
So the very people who are crafting and promoting this legislation are the ones who are going to profit the most from it.
Exactly. It stinks, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you wonder, if this was such a great idea, why did they have to resort to these kinds of tactics to get it passed?
It does raise some serious questions about the legitimacy of the process.
It does.
And it connects back to those concerns about transparency and accountability that surround the Federal Reserve even today.
It seems like there's a lot of shady stuff going on behind the scenes.
There's always more to this story than meets the eye.
There is. Okay, but let's shift gears a little bit. Let's move away from the historical drama.
Okay.
And talk about the Fed as it exists today.
The Fed in the 1990s.
Exactly. How does this institution that was born out of all this secrecy and controversy, how does it actually operate? What does it do?
All right, so the Federal Reserve System, it's a bit complex. But essentially, it's comprised of a board of governors appointed by the president and 12 regional banks located throughout the country.
Okay, so there's like a central authority, the board of governors, but also these regional banks that are presumably more in touch with like local economic conditions.
In theory, yes.
Okay, so that's the idea.
Yeah.
But one of the main criticisms of the Fed is that it's not truly accountable to the public.
That's a common criticism, yeah.
And Sutton points out that throughout its history, New York bankers,
yes,
they've held a disproportionate amount of power within the Federal Reserve System.
Wall Street's influence is hard to ignore.
So even though it's supposed to be a national institution serving the interests of the entire country, there's this concern that it's actually controlled by a small group of elites on Wall Street.
It's a concern that's been voiced by critics from across the political spectrum.
It has.
But let's get into the nitty-gritty of how the Fed actually manages the money supply, shall we?
Okay, let's do it. Lay it on me.
This is where things get really interesting and maybe a little unsettling.
Oh, I love unsettling.
All right, so the Fed has the power to create money.
Create money?
Essentially out of thin air through a process known as, are you ready for this, fractional reserve banking.
Hold on. Create money out of thin air. How is that even possible?
It's a complex process involving banks lending out a portion of their deposits and the Fed, manipulating reserve requirements.
Oh, yeah.
But the bottom line is the Fed can increase the money supply simply by issuing credit to banks.
So the Fed is literally creating new money.
That's right.
And injecting it into the economy.
Precisely.
I'm starting to see why some people refer to it as a money printing machine.
A colorful term, isn't it?
It is. So, but what are the implications of this? Doesn't creating more money lead to inflation?
That's one of the big debates surrounding the Fed's policies. Proponents argue that the Fed's ability to control the money supply is essential for maintaining economic stability, preventing deflation.
Okay.
They say that by carefully adjusting interest rates and reserve requirements, the Fed can keep inflation in check while also promoting economic growth.
Okay, but critics would say that this power to manipulate the money supply is is inherently dangerous, right? Like it could lead to inflation, asset bubbles, economic instability.
Exactly. They argue that the Fed's interventions often have unintended consequences,
Yeah.
and that its actions can benefit certain sectors of the economy at the expense of others.
Right. So it's like picking winners and
In
losers.
a way, yes.
Okay. So it seems like there's no like easy answer here.
There rarely is when it comes to economics.
Right. Managing the money supply, it's a delicate balancing act, and there are valid arguments on both sides of the debate.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue with no simple solutions.
It is. But
Yeah.
but Sutton also points to this revolving door, right? Between the Fed and Wall Street
Yes, the revolving door.
as a cause for concern.
It's a valid concern.
So he gives like several examples of individuals who have held positions at both the Fed and major financial institutions.
Right, moving back and forth between the public and private sectors.
And it suggests that the lines between public and private interests, they can get blurred.
They can get very blurry indeed.
For instance, he mentions Paul Volcker,
Oh yes, Paul Volcker.
who served as Fed chairman in the late 1970s and early 1980s.
A very influential figure.
He was. But before joining the Fed, Volcker held positions at Chase Manhattan Bank.
One of the largest banks in the country.
So it's possible that individuals who have these close ties to the banking industry, they might be making decisions that benefit their former employers or their colleagues.
It's certainly a possibility that we need to consider.
It's a pretty unsettling thought.
It is. It raises questions about who the Fed is really serving.
Right. So we have this central bank with the power to create money out of thin air.
An extraordinary power.
It is. And this history of secrecy and questionable political dealings.
A checkered past, to say the least.
And these concerns about its accountability to the public.
It's not exactly a pristine image, is it?
It's not. It kind of paints a pretty unsettling picture, wouldn't you say?
It does raise some red flags, that's for sure.
It does. But before we jump to any conclusions, let's take a step back
Okay.
and consider the broader context.
All right, what do you mean by broader context?
Well, I mean, we've been focusing on the criticisms and the controversy surrounding the Federal Reserve, but it's important to remember that the Fed is a product of its time.
A creature of history, yes.
Right. So we need to understand the historical circumstances that led to its creation.
Exactly. We can't judge it solely by today's standards.
We can't. So the early 20th century, right? That was a period of significant economic instability in the U.S., wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Frequent bank panics, no unified currency. It was a chaotic time.
It was. And there was this growing sense that something needed to be done to reform the financial system.
The system was clearly broken.
It was. So the creation of the Federal Reserve, it was at least in part a response to these challenges.
It was an attempt to bring order to the chaos, to create a more stable and predictable financial system.
Okay, so it's important to acknowledge that the Fed has played a role in stabilizing the financial system and preventing, some of the worst excesses of the past.
It has provided a degree of stability and has acted as a lender of last resort during times of crisis.
Right. But whether its benefits outweigh its drawbacks, that's a debate that continues to this day.
A debate that we should all be engaged in.
We should. So it sounds like understanding the Federal Reserve requires us to really grapple with some complex and nuanced issues.
It's not a simple topic.
It's not. There are valid arguments on both sides, and it's not this simple black and white issue.
It's full of gray areas.
It is. But I'm curious to hear Sutton's overall assessment.
Okay.
What are his main takeaways from this deep dive into the Federal Reserve?
Well, Sutton's perspective is certainly a critical one.
It is.
Oh, yeah. He paints a picture of the Fed as an institution born out of secrecy, manipulation, and the pursuit of power by a financial elite.
So he's not exactly a fan of the Fed.
Let's just say he's skeptical of its motives and its impact.
Okay, I got it. He argues that the Fed, despite its claims of independence, really serves the interests of private banks.
Right. He sees it as a tool of the money power that Lincoln warned about.
He does.
Yeah.
And that it's contributed to economic instability through its ability to manipulate the money supply.
He believes that the Fed's actions have often exacerbated economic problems rather than solved them.
Okay, that's a pretty damning assessment.
It is, but I'm sure there are plenty of people who would disagree with his conclusions.
Oh, I'm sure. So where does that leave us? seems like we're left with more questions than answers.
In a way, that's the point of a deep dive like this.
It is.
We're not here to provide, definitive answers or tell you what to think.
So we're not here to tell people what to think.
No, we're here to encourage you to think critically,
Okay.
to question assumptions, and to explore different perspectives.
So the Federal Reserve conspiracy, it may not be the final word on the subject.
It's just one perspective.
It is, but it raises important questions.
Important and uncomfortable questions.
It does. About the nature of money and power and the institutions that shape our world.
The institutions that wield immense power over our lives.
They do.
Yeah.
So what can we do with this information? How can we apply these insights to our own lives?
Well, for starters, we can become more informed citizens.
More informed citizens.
We can pay attention to the Fed's actions, understand how its policies, impact our daily lives, and engage in informed discussions about the future of monetary policy.
So we can be more engaged, more informed.
Exactly. And we can think critically about the information we're consuming.
Be more discerning.
Especially when it comes to complex issues like finance and economics.
Right.
Don't just accept what you hear at face value.
Don't just blindly trust the experts.
Do your own research. Consider different viewpoints.
Think for yourself.
And come to your own conclusions.
It's about empowering ourselves to be informed and engaged citizens, isn't it?
It is. It's about taking ownership of our understanding of the world.
And that's a journey that never really ends.
It's a lifelong pursuit.
It is. And who knows, maybe this deep dive has inspired you to learn more about the Federal Reserve.
Or to explore other perspectives.
To challenge conventional wisdom. Wouldn't that be great?
I think that would be fantastic. The more we question, the more we learn.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, the more we understand about the systems that govern our world,
the systems that shape our lives,
the better equipped we are to navigate them and to advocate for a more just and equitable society.
Well said. And speaking of advocating for change, Sutton's book raises some interesting questions about the role of social movements and grassroots activism in challenging the power of institutions like the Federal Reserve.
Ooh, now that's a topic I'd love to explore further.
It's a fascinating area of inquiry.
It is, but unfortunately we're out of time for today's deep dive.
Time flies when you're having fun exploring conspiracies.
It really does. But this conversation, it doesn't have to end here.
No.
We encourage you to continue exploring these ideas.
You do your own research.
To share your thoughts.
Engage with others.
Because the more we talk about these issues,
our light we shed.
Right. The more we can shed light on these hidden forces that shape our world.
And who knows? Maybe together. We can create a more transparent and accountable system that truly serves the needs of all people.
That's a great aspiration.
It is, and we hope that this deep dive has given you some food for thought and some inspiration to continue learning and engaging with these important issues.
It has been a fascinating journey, hasn't it?
It has, exploring the history and inner workings of the Federal Reserve.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the historical roots of central banking to the complex mechanisms by which the Fed operates today.
We've looked at the controversies, the criticisms, the potential risks.
But we've also highlighted the importance of critical thinking.
Informed citizenship.
And the power of collective action.
To shape a more just and equitable economic system.
We have. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's inspired you to continue learning.
To keep questioning.
And to never stop exploring.
Until next time.
Until next time, stay curious.
Okay, so we've heard, Sutton's take on how the Fed came to be, all the secret meetings, the political maneuvering, the influence of these powerful banking interests. But what I'm really curious about is this. How does all of this connect to my life in 1995? What does the Federal Reserve actually do today? And how does it affect me?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in all the historical drama, but ultimately, what matters is how the Fed impacts our everyday lives.
Right, exactly.
And one of the key ways it does that is through its control over interest rates.
Okay, interest rates. I know they affect things like mortgages and credit card debt, but can you break it down for me? Like how does the Fed how does it actually manipulate those rates?
Okay, so the Fed has a couple of primary tools to influence interest rates. One is called open market operations.
Open market
Well, it
operations.
sounds it sounds complicated,
It does.
but it's actually pretty simple.
Okay.
Just imagine the Fed as this giant buyer and seller of government bonds.
Okay.
So when the Fed buys bonds, it's injecting money into the banking system, increasing the money supply and pushing interest rates down.
So if I'm like looking to buy a house or take out a loan, a lower interest rate is generally good news for me.
Exactly. Lower rates mean it's cheaper to borrow money, which can stimulate economic activity. Businesses invest more, people buy more houses and cars, the economy gets a boost.
Right, okay.
On the flip side, when the Fed sells bonds, it pulls money out of the system, reducing the money supply and pushing interest rates up.
So it makes things more expensive.
Right. Borrowing becomes more expensive, which can help to curb inflation, but it can slow down economic growth.
So it's all a balancing act.
It
It's
is.
like the Fed is constantly trying to find that sweet spot, right? Between promoting growth and keeping inflation in check.
Exactly. It's like walking a tightrope. It is. Okay, that makes sense. So they buy and sell bonds. What's the other tool that they use?
The other main tool is called the discount rate,
The discount rate. Okay.
which is the interest rate at which banks can borrow money directly from the Federal Reserve.
Oh, okay. Directly from the source.
Exactly. So by raising or lowering the discount rate, the Fed can influence the overall cost of borrowing for banks, which then, trickles down to consumers and businesses.
So even though the Fed doesn't set the interest rates directly for things like mortgages or car loans, they still have a huge influence on the overall lending environment.
A huge influence. It's like setting the tone for the entire financial system.
Okay, that makes sense. But Sutton's book, it also talks about this thing called fractional reserve banking.
Ah, yes.
And I have to admit, that one still has me a little bit confused.
It's a bit of a mind-bending concept, but I'll try to explain it in a way that hopefully makes sense.
Okay, please.
So think about it this way. When you deposit money in a bank, the bank doesn't just hold on to all of that cash, right?
No, they lend it out to other people.
Right. But here's the catch. They're only required to keep a fraction of your deposit on hand as reserves.
A fraction.
A fraction. The rest they can lend out to other borrowers.
So my money is essentially being multiplied through this lending process.
That's the magic of fractional reserve banking.
The magic, huh?
Well, it can seem like magic, but it also creates a situation where the money supply is essentially based on debt.
But what do you mean by that?
Well, every time a bank makes a loan, it's essentially creating new money. That new money enters the economy as debt, and it needs to be repaid, with interest. So in a way, the whole system is built on this foundation of ever expanding debt.
So the more loans the banks make, the more money there is in circulation, but also the more debt there is in the system.
Precisely. And this is one of the key points that Sutton makes in his book. He argues that this system of fractional reserve banking is inherently unstable and prone to crises.
Yeah, I can see how that could be a concern. Like if too many people default on their loans, the whole system could collapse.
That's the risk. And it's why central banks like the Fed play such a crucial role in trying to manage the money supply and prevent, financial crises. But as we've discussed, the Fed's actions aren't always perfect, and there are always potential unintended consequences.
Right. Okay, so this has been a fascinating journey exploring the history and the inner workings of the Federal Reserve. But as we wrap up our deep dive, I'm left with this one big question. What does this all mean for the average person? What can we do with this knowledge?
I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of being informed, understanding how the Fed's actions, particularly its control over interest rates and the money supply, how those things impact your daily life.
So pay attention to financial news. Learn about economic concepts like inflation and deflation and think critically about the information you're consuming.
Exactly. Don't just blindly trust the the experts, do your own research, ask questions, and form your own opinions.
It's all about empowering ourselves, isn't it? To be
Mhm.
informed and engaged citizens.
It is. It's about recognizing that these systems, like the Federal Reserve, while they're, complex and often opaque, they're ultimately human creations.
So if we don't like the way things are working, we have the power to change them.
Absolutely. Change doesn't happen overnight, of course,
Mm.
and it requires collective action and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
But it all starts with understanding the system, knowing the players and recognizing the levers of power.
That's where a deep dive like this comes in handy. It gives you the tools and the knowledge to start asking the right questions and to engage in more informed discussions about the future of our economy.
Well, I think that's a great place to end our exploration of the Federal Reserve. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the historical roots of central banking to the complex mechanisms by which the Fed operates today.
We've explored the controversies, the criticisms, and the potential risks associated with a powerful central bank.
But we've also highlighted the importance of critical thinking, informed citizenship, and the power of collective action to shape a more just and equitable economic system.
We have. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's inspired you to continue learning, questioning, and exploring the world around you.
And remember, the journey doesn't end here. Keep asking questions, keep digging, and keep pushing for a better future. Till next time, stay curious.